Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Minister of Public Safety.
I request an extended introduction, Mr. Speaker.
Leave has been requested. Leave approved. Agreed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, I'd like to introduce the senior leadership from the commissionaires. Seated in the Speaker's Gallery is Monique Miller, Chief Executive Officer for Southern Saskatchewan, Jonathan Tremblay, Director of Business Development, and Nora Marner, Director of Operations. They're here with us today to visit and meet with the members of the Legislative District Security Unit and their members who work tirelessly in this building day in and day out. Commissionaires are Canada's largest private sector employer of veterans and are the only national not-for-profit security company. Commissionaires have been a staple in our Saskatchewan communities and are trusted every day and everywhere to provide security, fingerprinting, pre-employment, background screening services, etc. They have also been a staple in this building since I began my political career now many years ago. I want to recognize our guests here today for the hard work that they do to keep the commissionaires in Saskatchewan successful and thriving. I also want to say a special thank you to all the commissionaire members, the LDSU members that not only protect elected members, but the hundreds of staff that work in and around this building on a daily basis. We thank you. Keep up the great work.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
To join with the minister opposite in welcoming and recognizing this leadership team from the commissionaires here at their legislature, Jonathan, Norm, and Monique. Monique, in particular, it's such a pleasure to see you here. Thank you for all that you do in making this city and this community such a better place to live in, and for all that you've done since you've moved over to commissionaires a few years ago. I also want to join with the minister in thanking the commissionaires who have worked, as she has said already, in this building for so many years, providing such good service and protection to the people who work in this building for a very long time. As also mentioned, they don't just work in this building, they work throughout the entire province, doing a very incredible, great work. Thank you so much for your service. Thank you so much for being here today, and I'd ask all members to join me in welcoming them.
Recognize a member from Martensville, Warman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you this afternoon, I'd like to introduce two very special guests that we have with us in your gallery today. With us, we have Dr. Stephen Ellis. He is the Member of Parliament for Cumberland-Colchester in Nova Scotia. And Dr. Ellis, if you want to just give us a quick wave, was elected in September of 2021 and is a member of the Standing Committee on Health and is now Vice Chair, I believe. And Dr. Ellis has been a family physician for 22 years and gained his experience by taking his medical officer training with the Royal Canadian Air Force, where he served for 9 years. With Dr. Ellis today is his Director of Parliamentary Affairs, Alison Haley. Alison, give us a quick wave. Alison is joining us today. We've been touring the building, and I think both of them are very impressed with what they've seen so far, and we look forward to meeting them with various ministers this afternoon and again tomorrow. So with that, I'd like everybody in the Legislative Assembly today to welcome Dr. Stephen Ellis and Alison Haley to their Saskatchewan legislature.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Riversdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested for extended introduction. Is leave granted? Carried.
To you and through you, Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to introduce in your gallery today a very hard-working young man, the Member of Parliament for Saskatoon West, Brad Redekop. Brad was first elected in 2019, and myself and my office have been given the distinct pleasure of working closely with your office and your team. As the Associate Shadow Minister for Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship, Brad is currently working on reuniting families, welcoming newcomers, and working on cutting red tape and improving our immigration system. I've attended many events with Brad and his team and see firsthand how seriously he takes his job, and I'm proud to call Brad my friend. I would ask all members to join me in welcoming Brad Redekop to his Legislative Assembly. While I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I would like to quickly introduce a young man that I've had the pleasure to get to know over the years. Mr. Speaker, seeing youth with interest in politics always warms my heart throughout the years. And with no further ado, Jared Campbell has been very involved with politics and with a distinct interest in different things, politics, throughout most of his life. And he has the pleasure to serve, I believe it's a pleasure, with Brad Redekop as his assistant. So please join me in welcoming Jared Campbell to his Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was just looking back to make sure that the member for Riverside didn't have 3 or 4 more introductions to do. I just wanted to get everything sort of squared away. Mr. Speaker, it's my privilege to introduce Doug Schweitzer, who is seated in your gallery. He is a former MLA from Alberta. He was elected as an MLA for Calgary-Elbow in 2019. He served as Minister of Justice and Solicitor General of Alberta, as well as Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation. He graduated from law school in 2006 from the University of Manitoba. And I know what my Premier is going to say about not having enough lawyers in the House, and this is one of the things we always want to bring more lawyers into the House. He articled with Bennett Jones LLB. He was called to the bar in 2007. I got to know him quite well during his tenure as Minister of Justice when we collaborated to try and prevent some federal incursion into some matters that we believed were some significant provincial matters, and we think we set some groundwork for some other matters that we're dealing with the federal government at the present times. As Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, Doug played a vital role in helping Alberta recover from the impacts of COVID and setting the province on a path to economic growth. He served as an MLA until August of last year and has since joined Deloitte as a senior advisor. Please join me in welcoming Doug to the Saskatchewan Legislature.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would like to join in with the members and Minister opposite in welcoming these folks to the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan today. Dr. Ellis and Brad Redekop, both members of Parliament. Brad Redekop, my member of Parliament in Saskatoon West. Welcome and thank you for being here today, as well as Doug Schweitzer, former MLA from Alberta. Thank you for taking the time to spend some time in our legislature, and I do hope that your meetings go well today, and would ask everyone to join us in welcoming them to the legislature today.
Recognize the Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are 17 public service employees seated in the Speaker's gallery today. If you could just give us a wave. Thank you. They are here today to take part in the parliamentary program for the public service. The program includes a tour of the Legislative Building, briefings presented by various branches of the Legislative Assembly Services and Executive Council. They have an opportunity to sit in the Speaker's gallery and observe question period and other House business. They have briefings with members from both sides of the House and with yourself, Mr. Speaker. So I get to visit them, and a member across the way will get to visit them a little later today. The participants that we have with us today are from the Ministries of Agriculture, Education, Environment, Finance, Highways, Justice and Attorney General, Public Service Commission, Social Services, Trade and Export Development, and Legislative Assembly Services. So please join me in welcoming these visitors to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon, Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honour to join with the Minister in welcoming this great group of public servants to their legislature. It's always great having the parliamentary program here. I always enjoy meeting with them and hearing their questions and their thoughts on all things legislative business. Looking forward to having the opportunity to do so again today. I'd ask all members to join me once again in welcoming them to their legislature.
Presenting petitions, I recognize a member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to present the following petition calling for duty to consult legislation. We, the undersigned residents of this province, wish to bring to your attention the following. The Government of Saskatchewan is currently selling off and offering long 33-year leases on Crown lands that have been used by Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. Without clear duty to consult legislation in place, the Government of Saskatchewan alone is responsible for recognizing when the duty to consult is triggered, contributing to a lack of engagement with Indigenous communities, and it leaves little accountability for the government, which often ends in lost court battles. We, in the prayer that reads, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately stop the sell-off of Crown lands and enshrine duty to consult into law by enacting the meaningful duty to consult legislation. The folks who signed this petition reside in Saskatoon. I do so present.
Recognize the member from Kenora Pelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. That the Liberal NDP federal government continues to infringe on the constitutional rights of the province of Saskatchewan and implement policies that are detrimental to our province's economic well-being. That the commitments and the actions of the federal government have made the control of Saskatchewan's resource rights unclear, and that an unsupportive federal government will continue to impede Saskatchewan's potential to play a global role in providing resources to the world market. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan to take the following action. To call upon the Government of Saskatchewan to implement the SAS First policies and legislation that will support the development of Saskatchewan's global supplier of fuel, food, and fertilizer without federal infringement on Saskatchewan's constitutional authority. The below undersigned are residents of Carrot River. I do so.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise once again today to present a petition to the Government of Saskatchewan to fix the rural health care staffing crisis. These citizens wish to bring to our attention that recruiting and retention of healthcare professionals is a particular issue in Saskatchewan's rural healthcare facilities, leading to many emergency room, acute, lab, and X-ray service disruptions, that the ongoing pandemic has burned out and led to early retirements and resignations, which has rippling effects for our cities and towns, that healthcare workers and their families are valuable assets in Saskatchewan communities and local economies. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to fix the rural health care staffing crisis. This is signed by individuals from Wilkie today, Mr. Speaker. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. I recognize a member from Saskatoon Fairview.
I rise today in recognition that March is Multiple Myeloma Awareness Month. Multiple myeloma is a blood cancer that is specific to a white blood cell called plasma. As of now, there is no cure for multiple myeloma, but thanks to research and clinical trials, there are several treatments for this type of cancer. Treatments can offer relief of symptoms and, if caught at an early stage of the disease, can improve an individual's prognosis and quality of life. Treatments for multiple myeloma can range from monitoring and observation to targeted chemotherapy, immunotherapy, and stem cell transplant. Some of the treatments can require an individual to have a lengthy period of recovery. Therefore, it's important for persons going through treatments to have a broad base of support from their healthcare providers to their friends, family, and community. It is with this in mind that I ask my fellow colleagues to join me in recognizing the importance of multiple myeloma awareness throughout this month of March. Let us acknowledge those members in our communities across the province who are experiencing the challenges of living with multiple myeloma and their loved ones who are walking this journey in support alongside them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jean Malot is a man with a big heart, and we are fortunate to have him live in Prince Albert Northcote. A retired welder with an extensive career in the oil and gas industry, Jean has used his knowledge to craft rings. And over the years, he has created rings for his grandchildren and close friends. When the pandemic started, he used his stay-at-home time to create rings so he could pay tribute to the Humboldt Broncos and emergency personnel involved in the tragic bus crash. Earlier last year, Jean presented 30 rings to the Broncos organization, 29 to honor the team members and staff who were on the bus, and 1 Star of Life ring to pay tribute to the EMS and first responders who were on the scene to administer medical treatment. Jean says, losing that many people and crippling that many people at one time is unheard of. And of the emergency responders, he added, you have to be very special and very, very dedicated people to go to a scene like that. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in thanking Jean Malot for his creativity, his kindness, and for being one of Saskatchewan's best. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand today proud to represent Saskatoon-Meewasin and as the official opposition critic for Parks, Culture and Sport to highlight the dedication and passion of the administration, staff and volunteers and community members of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada. The museum is situated along the banks of the South Saskatchewan River in Saskatoon-Meewasin and is home to beautiful historical artifacts that remain pertinent today. I was recently invited to bring remarks to the opening of a new exhibit remembering the discriminatory reality of Canada's detainment policies during World War I. Thousands of Ukrainians were among those held in internment camps across Canada, made to relinquish their possessions and forced to labor in a country they did not know. As Putin continues his unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, current events remind us that history is only as distant as our willingness to acknowledge the past. I invite all members to join me in thanking Executive Director and CEO of the Ukrainian Museum of Canada, Jen Budney, and Carrie Parnell for their important work enlivening the past so that we may all enlighten our present.
Recognize the member from Martinsville-Warman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past weekend, the Warman Home Centre Communiplex was the site of Saskatchewan's largest cheerleading competition. Mr. Speaker, the 16th annual Warman Cheer Classic saw over 3,000 young athletes from Saskatchewan, Alberta, Manitoba, British Columbia, and Ontario competing. Over 5,000 spectators packed the Communiplex for the 3-day event, and over 400 volunteers diligently worked to ensure everything went smoothly. Mr. Speaker, Leslie Stevenson runs the Warman Ultimate Cheer Club, and she also works with the school clubs in Warman and some other communities as well. It was Leslie's vision 16 years ago to begin the Warman Cheer Classic, and she brought it to life, and it's now one of Western Canada's biggest cheerleading events. Mr. Speaker, cheerleading is a sport that encourages teamwork, personal and physical growth, and goal setting, while also instilling confidence and allowing young athletes to gain practical life skills. But the stunting, jumping, and tumbling isn't over yet, Mr. Speaker. This Saturday, Regina will host the Provincial Cheerleading Championships at the Connexus Arts Centre. Teams representing 14 clubs, as well as high schools from across Saskatchewan, will be looking to cap off their season with a provincial championship. Mr. Speaker, we wish all athletes and their teams the very best this weekend, and may there be lots of zeros recorded. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak about Regina Trades and Skills Centre. I was pleased to bring greetings on behalf of the Premier and the Saskatchewan government last fall as they celebrated 15 years of success. The RTSC has been a Regina staple for many years, providing exceptional trades and skills training to many residents. In a changing economy and world, skilled labor and trades are only growing in demand. Careers in skilled labor and trades offer competitive pay and challenging, rewarding work. With more than 40 designated trades in Saskatchewan to choose from, RTSC can help you get your boot in the door. It can be a challenge getting started, but with RTSC, attaining skills training is within reach for many residents. RTSC's consistently high enrollment and employment rates, 93% last year, speak volumes to the success of the centre and their contribution to the growth plan goals to expand and strengthen the Saskatchewan labour market. RTSC provides education and just-in-time entry-level training and helps to build social skills and enhance motivation. These skills can open doors to better jobs, increase self-confidence, and an improved quality of life. It remains ever important to ensure Saskatchewan's workforce has the skills and tools they need to succeed, because if they succeed, we all succeed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Kurt River Valley.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Nipawin has a new skiing dynasty. Ty, Lane, and Aubrey Annan, all siblings, were in Regina last month for the Saskatchewan Winter Games. Aubrey, 11, won gold in the under-13 ski cross and 2 silver medals in the alpine skiing U13 slalom. Her older brother, Lane, 13, brought home 2 silver medals in the U15 slalom skiing. And Ty, 15, the oldest of the siblings, came home with the bronze in the U17 slalom. Ty even had the opportunity to continue on to compete in the Canada Games, where he represented the town of Nipawin on the national stage. Mr. Speaker, through you, I ask that all members of the Assembly join me in congratulating the Annan family on their achievements in this year's Saskatchewan Games. We wish them the best of luck in the future, and especially good luck to Ty as he prepares for the Saskatchewan Cup Finals in March and the Alberta Finals in early April. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize a member from Regina Pasqua.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite are not going to want to hear it, but we are getting more good news from our economy. In February of 2023, urban housing starts in Saskatchewan increased by a massive 76.4% compared to February 2022. That puts the province not third, not second, but the first in the nation. And Mr. Speaker, in these first 2 months of 2023 alone, urban housing starts in the province increased by nearly 50% compared to the year prior. That's the second in the nation in terms of growth by percentage. More people are choosing to move here, work here, and raise their families here in Saskatchewan. And that's because Saskatchewan is one of the most affordable, stable, and growth-oriented jurisdictions on the planet. We are committed to continuing to grow our province and realizing its full potential as an economic powerhouse. That's something that was never on the agenda for the opposition when they had the privilege of forming government. 1.21 million people, Mr. Speaker, and growing. Mr. Speaker, with an economy that punches far above its weight. And Mr. Speaker, that's mean more housing, more jobs, and more opportunities for our young families. And that's growth that works for everyone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Question period. I recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, despite their spin, this is a government that is failing on the economy and failing when it comes to health care. Look no further than our capital city. This week, the Regina General ER was on bypass, shutting down its emergency room to all but the most critical patients, all because of the failures of this tired and out-of-touch government. Is this what the people of Regina should expect when it comes to their emergency care?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as continue in the past, Mr. Speaker, and ongoing into the future, Mr. Speaker, there's always ebbs and flows within our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker. Last week, we did feel some pressures at the General in Regina and also up in Saskatoon. I've been told by officials that the pressure has been alleviated, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to work on our human resource plan to make sure that the people in Saskatchewan get the healthcare that they deserve, Mr. Speaker, not just in the city of Regina, not just in Saskatoon, but all across our province. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
This is not business as usual, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we have healthcare workers sounding the alarm. The disaster at the Regina General this week should never have happened. Sun President Tracy Zambori said, quote, "There is not the time, there is not the capability, and there is not the staff to give safe patient care in most of our facilities in the province anymore." To the Minister of Health, does he accept any responsibility for the state of healthcare under his watch? And what is he going to do to ensure that this never happens again?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I had the opportunity to meet with the President, Ms. Zambori, 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, to discuss exactly what we are doing with our health human resource plan. We have an open dialogue conversation with Sun as well as our other stakeholder and our other union providers. Mr. Speaker, what we are doing about this was announced back in September, and I'd like the Deputy Leader of the Opposition to understand this. We are working our 4-point plan, and it is working, Mr. Speaker. 165 more doctors in our province, Mr. Speaker. 72 nurses that were just hired from last December, Mr. Speaker. We've brought in nurses from the Philippines. We're recruiting across Canada. The Minister of Advanced Education has announced 550 additional seats for 18 designations on top of the 150 nursing seats, Mr. Speaker. This is exactly what we're doing. We're looking at expanding the scope of the healthcare providers that we do have in our system to maximize everybody to work at the top of their scope. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
And Sun's been very clear, as has the provincial auditor, that that HR plan is not enough. It's not working, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government has been in power for 15 years. These failures are their failures. This is their record, and they should be taking responsibility for it. But they aren't, and they're refusing to listen to local voices in healthcare. Yesterday, the minister shot down Tracy Zambori's request for a special task force to fix this issue. Apparently, he thinks everything is going fine, Mr. Speaker. It's hard to imagine how much more out of touch this minister could be. Why won't he listen to nurses and work to find real solutions to the crisis in our ERs?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know they wrote out their questions, but if the member opposite was listening, I just met with Sun 2 weeks ago. Mr. Speaker, we do meet with our union stake. I meet with the SMA almost monthly. I meet with the family physicians group. I meet with the college. I meet with the Dean of Medicine, Mr. Speaker, all to come up with ideas from those sectors that we have incorporated into our plan, Mr. Speaker, which we've put budgetary dollars. We've put our HHR plan out there. We have our surgical resumption, our surgical targets, something that was never, ever set by the opposition, Mr. Speaker. We've set targets to be able to meet the needs of Saskatchewan. We're working on that, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this side of the House will never, ever take for granted that the people that we represent here in rural and urban Saskatchewan to make sure that they have the health care that they need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
That sounds really nice, Mr. Speaker, but they don't have the health care that they need right now. That's the issue. This should not be happening in Saskatchewan hospitals. There's no excuse for this. There were 85 patients in the ER waiting for care at the Regina General last Thursday. 100 patients waiting for care at the RUH-ER on Monday, with patients in the hallway on portable cardiac monitors and no supervision. And the hospital in Yorkton is routinely forced to send patients to other centres because the ICU is full. This government is failing to deliver all across the province. How much worse do things need to get before this government will fix the crisis in our ERs? And when will the minister show any responsibility?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We just had the opportunity to go up to Saskatoon the last 2 days and talk to probably 250 delegates in 2 dialogue sessions, the Minister of Rural and Remote and myself, Mr. Speaker. We also had almost 1,000 delegates there today, 2,000 delegates there today, Mr. Speaker. Open questions. We are accessible, Mr. Speaker, to the people of Saskatchewan to be able to answer the questions. They do have some legitimate concerns out there in rural Saskatchewan. The Minister of Rural and Remote Health and myself, Mr. Speaker, are facing the same challenges that other provinces are in Canada, Mr. Speaker. But the difference is, as I've said many times in this House, Mr. Speaker, is we have the plan, we have the dollars, it is start working. I'd like the member opposite to acknowledge that we brought in the last 16 months 165 doctors, almost 60 family physicians, 72 nurses that we brought in. But we're not just doing that for right now. We have the training seats to be able to build the capacity for the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
And how many people are walking out the door because there's no plan for retention in this province, Mr. Speaker? These issues are impacting real people. One particular example of how this plays out in people's lives is the situation that Sharon Chartier went through. In Saskatoon, Sharon called for an ambulance after she started having heart problems. She waited over an hour for an ambulance to arrive. Once it finally came, she had to wait more than an hour in the ambulance before she could get care from the hospital staff, all because the ER was full. Does the minister think it's acceptable for people to wait more than an hour for an ambulance, more than an hour again at the hospital for people to get care? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And just last week, I had the opportunity to sit down with the regional coordinator, Jerry Schreimer of Medavie, to be able to discuss this particular issue, Mr. Speaker, but also the overall flow within hospitals, which the SHA is working on. Mr. Speaker, in the last 3 months, we've been able to reduce the amount of alternate level of care people in our hospital by 20%. We've also been able to reduce the amount of time that people are waiting, that the ambulances are waiting at the hospitals in Saskatoon and in Regina, especially from rural Saskatchewan, is down 40% since December. We have some more work to do on this, Mr. Speaker, but there are some peak times out there where our ambulances will be busy, Mr. Speaker, and we are continuing to work with our ambulance providers, as well as our emergency rooms, as well as the people in hospital, to make sure that the flow of the hospital is what we need it to be. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Sharon knew she needed help urgently, so she called 911. She waited on the floor, alone at home, for more than an hour before help finally arrived. Once the paramedics arrived, they took great care of her. But paramedics themselves showed their own frustrations that these long wait times for ambulances and long wait times in hospital emergency rooms happen all the time. Again, these problems are widespread across our province. What is the government's plan to address the crisis in our emergency rooms?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. As the member might recall, that we did have over 70 FTEs that were brought into our budget last year for rural ambulances as well as city ambulances, Mr. Speaker. And we've also implemented, with the feedback from the ambulance providers, a couple of options, Mr. Speaker, that now that the ambulance can go and treat somebody and can release, instead of having to bring them in, we also have virtual care. This is something that the emergency room doctors asked for and the ambulance providers asked for, Mr. Speaker, and with the help of the SHA and surgeons and people that are running the wards and the triage nurses, we were able to implement this very quickly to make sure that the ambulance providers are able to keep moving, keep going to pick up those patients, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to work with the SHA, the ambulance providers, and the emergency room doctors to make things as efficient as possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear that this plan is not working. Sharon is my constituent, and this government failed her when she needed it the most. She spent her career as a registered nurse looking after others in our healthcare system. And when she needed the healthcare system to be there for her, this government let her down. While she was on the floor, waiting for the ambulance, not knowing when it would arrive, she called her sons to say goodbye. How is this acceptable to this health minister? When will we see real action to fix the crisis in our ERs that led to this mess?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The quick answer is, Mr. Speaker, that's not acceptable. That's not what I would want in our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker, but we are working with the healthcare providers to provide better service, Mr. Speaker. As I've identified, there are peaks in flow or ebb and flow with our ambulance providers, but I know I've gone on ride-alongs with these individuals. I've met with them. I've sat down in the coffee rooms and talked to them. They want to get to those patients as fast as they possibly can, and we want to be able to provide the funds for them to do that. We're continuing to try to find efficiencies with the emergency room doctors, with the ambulance providers, and with all the people in the SHA that are working hard to make sure that the patients are taken care of. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The ebbs and flows of this government's failures are hurting people. I spoke with Sharon today. I heard her story, and what happened to her is simply unacceptable. No one should have to wait an hour for an ambulance to arrive after signs of serious heart problems. In her own words, Mr. Speaker, I quote, "I knew that healthcare was under a lot of stress, but as someone who worked in acute care for 30 years, the last thing I expected was to not get the help when I needed it the most at a critical time." What does the minister have to say to Sharon about that?
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First thing I would say to Sharon is thank you for your service in providing health care to the people of Saskatchewan the years that you did, Mr. Speaker. I very much appreciate everything that she's done. And as I identified in my earlier answer, Mr. Speaker, this is not acceptable. This is not something that anybody in Saskatchewan should expect. There are, as I've said, peak times and low times within our ambulance provider. Overall, we've been able to reduce that number by 40%, which is significant, Mr. Speaker. We've also been able to reduce the length of stay, average stay in somebody in the hospital by 1 day. Now, that may not sound like a lot, Mr. Speaker, but it is when you look at our overall healthcare system. If we can move people out of the hospital 1 day earlier and provide that care at home, Mr. Speaker, we will do that. But again, to Sharon, that's not acceptable, and my apologies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, the description of ebbs and flows in our healthcare system by this health minister is completely underestimating the problem, which is the crisis in our healthcare system, which we all know exists, and it exists despite how many 4-point plans they want to refer to over and over while people suffer in this province. Mr. Speaker, yesterday we pressed the Minister of Education as well for answers on his childcare announcement, but all he had to offer were more and more excuses, just like his colleague, the Health Minister. Let me be crystal clear. We strongly support the policy of $10 a day childcare in Saskatchewan. But details matter, Mr. Speaker, and the government didn't take the time to get this right. Parents who rely on part-time care shouldn't be collateral damage in this minister's desire to score a great headline. So, is the Minister of Education going to work with childcare workers and guarantee no one loses their childcare space as a result of this rushed announcement?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are going to work with our childcare facilities as we implement a new fee structure over the next number of months. No spaces will be reduced as a result of achieving the $10 per day 3 years in advance, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is good news for families that do rely on licensed childcare in the province. This is going to save between $400 and $600 per month for a full-time space, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated to the childcare workers that I met with yesterday, Mr. Speaker, we are going to work with them. We're going to take extra time implementing the $10 a day. Mr. Speaker, we're going to provide that additional money. Mr. Speaker, over the next number of months, we will work with the sector to implement the new fee structure.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, we want answers to these questions, not more talking points. This tired and washed-up government needs to actually get out there and listen. Listen to the parents and the childcare providers who stand to lose access to their spots. This is something that's happening right now, today. A one-size-fits-all approach clearly does not work for working mums in Saskatoon and Whitewood. Working mums, this minister is kicking out of childcare, will have nowhere to go except to another wait list. And access to a wait list is not access to childcare. What does the minister have to say to mums who will be forced out of the workforce as a result of his failure to get the details right?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, to be clear, no spaces are going to be cut because we achieved $10 per day 3 years early, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's the message that we have been sending to the federal government at the time that they made the announcement that they were moving to a national $10 a day, Mr. Speaker, is that not every situation is the same, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is the case among provinces, Mr. Speaker, where we all had different systems that had already been built, Mr. Speaker, and certainly we recognize as a government that holds true, Mr. Speaker, for within the province of Saskatchewan. So we are trying to achieve as much flexibility as we can, Mr. Speaker, within the agreement, Mr. Speaker, but I find it interesting because in July of 2021, before there was even a worksheet available to work from, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite were telling us to sign a deal. Now they're telling us we're implementing that deal too quickly, Mr. Speaker. In the past, they've said that $10 a day is good for the economy, Mr. Speaker, and just yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition said that $10 a day is going to be bad for the economy, Mr. Speaker, so which is it?
Here.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this government is failing to deliver when it comes to education in Saskatchewan. Teachers, parents, and school staff all know that this government isn't providing adequate support for students in our public and separate school divisions. Just look at Living Sky School Division, based out of the Battlefords. They've recently made a charity fund to help support the basic needs of their school division. Folks can go online to make a donation or even sign over the deposit return for their bottles at Sarcan. Does the minister think that it's okay that divisions have to essentially run bottle drives to make up for his failure to adequately fund our classrooms?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have had foundations in place that support the work of school divisions, both public and Catholic, for many years, including the school division that he was an employee of, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and I believe that that foundation started when the NDP were the government, Mr. Speaker, so I don't know why it was good then, but now it's a problem, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, foundations raise money for a variety of reasons to support the work that is done by public and separate school divisions, Mr. Speaker. Yep. Mr. Speaker, the budget that is just the budget year that's just concluding, Mr. Speaker, puts Saskatchewan over $2 billion in operational funding. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we are the highest per capita spent on primary and secondary schooling among all the provinces, 24% higher than the national average, and that's according to Stats Canada, who just last week, in fact, I think yesterday, the Leader of the Opposition said Stats Canada doesn't lie.
Here, here. Recognize the member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, this out-of-touch Sask Party government simply is not providing the stable and adequate funding so that programming in schools can operate without relying on charities, and that minister knows that. He knows this. Classroom complexity, EAL needs, overcrowded classrooms, these are all serious concerns in our schools, and the supports for teachers and students just aren't there as a result of that minister's failures. Now, I asked the minister about fundraising to support classrooms back in 2020, and he said, quote, "We are not going to rely on bake sales to ensure that we have a continuation of a safe return in schools." Mr. Speaker, he ruled out bake sales. How is it that bottle drives are now fair game for essential classroom supports?
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'll check the quote on that one, Mr. Speaker. But, Mr. Speaker, we provided over $2 billion in operational funding. That's an increase of $29.4 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on top of that, in year, we put in an additional $20 million to address inflation that school divisions were facing, Mr. Speaker, and further to that, $15.5 million to address significant enrollment that we're seeing, Mr. Speaker. We know that enrollment is up the greatest amount this year than we've seen in over 20 years, Mr. Speaker. And frankly, if we could find records quickly, Mr. Speaker, within the Ministry of Education, it would probably be even longer than 20 years, Mr. Speaker. So we're going to continue to provide that support. And that doesn't even touch the fact that we're supporting divisions through PMR, Mr. Speaker, which was never the case, which divisions had to fund out of their operations. We're funding that, Mr. Speaker, as well as record capital right across this province.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Eastview.
Mr. Speaker, families, teachers, and school divisions have been crystal clear. Our classrooms need more support from this government, and they're getting less. Years of inadequate investment has forced school divisions to cut supports instead of bolstering them, and has forced school divisions and community organizations to step in where this government is failing. Teachers and students should not need to rely on charity to fund the basics. Right. They should be able to count on their government. What does this say about this government's view on the importance of properly funded public education when charities have to step in and provide the supports that minister is failing to deliver?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I know in the case of his employer, Saskatoon Public School Division, Mr. Speaker, that foundation started a $20 million campaign, and I believe the Brownlee family put in $10 million. Would he not want that family that is able to contribute $10 million to public education freely of their own choice, Mr. Speaker? Mr. Speaker, certainly with this...
Send it back. Send it back.
So I guess we should shut down all foundations, perhaps health foundations as well that do good work across the province. Is that what the members opposite are saying? Mr. Speaker, the reality is this. Stats Canada, who the members opposite just days ago told us don't lie, says that Saskatchewan has the highest per capita spending on primary and secondary education out of every single province in this country, Mr. Speaker, 24% higher than the provincial average.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Coroner's Service has released the latest overdose numbers. 103 people died by overdose in January and February of this year. That's almost the same as the total for all of 2016 at 109. This tired and out-of-touch government day after day refuses to commit to supporting harm reduction. We know this saves dollars, but more importantly, Mr. Speaker, it saves lives. Will the Sask Party government commit to supporting harm reduction in the budget, yes or no? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I indicated yesterday, this government does support harm reduction. In this year's budget, 22-23, we are committing $3.8 million to harm reduction supports across Saskatchewan as part of our overall broader, longer-range plan for long-term treatment and recovery for people that are struggling with addictions. In this year's budget, that $3.8 million includes funding to expand the supply of fentanyl, benzodiazepine drug checking strips, as well as take-home naloxone kits, continuing to expand that particular program, Mr. Speaker, supporting 30 fixed harm reduction sites and 4 mobile harm reduction vans across this province, which provide basic health care as well as make connections for people with mental health and addictions counselors to help get them a treatment plan for long-term treatment and recovery. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition. Fundraise for you.
It really is just heartbreaking said Kayla DeMong, Executive Director of Prairie Harm Reduction. This is a nonprofit that provides harm reduction services for drug users in Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker. She continued, I don't know what it's going to take for the province to step up and say, we're not going to stand for this anymore, but the consequences of that inaction is that people will continue to die, end quote. Mr. Speaker, how many more people have to die before this government will take serious action when it comes to harm reduction?
Here, here.
Recognize the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government does take this issue very seriously. It's why, since 2007, we have spent over $18 million on harm reduction initiatives alone, funding a number of programs and services across this program, Mr. Speaker. It's why we'll be adding up to at least 150 more addictions treatment spaces across this province in the months and years ahead, Mr. Speaker. We'll soon be able to announce the first tranche of those new addictions treatment spaces as we continue to provide more access to treatment for people in Saskatchewan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Here we go.
Ministerial statements, introduction of bills, presenting reports by standing and special committees, orders of the day.
Government orders, adjourn debates. Item number 1, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 109, the Trespass to Property Amendment Act 2022, number 2. Mr. Vermette.
Recognize the member from Regina, Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's my honor to rise and enter into the debate on Bill number 109, the Trespass to Property Amendment Act. And I thank my colleagues who've already put some very thoughtful remarks on the record in the course of adjourned debate over this piece of legislation, Mr. Speaker. Now, when the Trespass Act originally came forward a few years ago, we put some very serious concerns on the record about the bill that we were hearing, about how it would affect many different stakeholders, Mr. Speaker, yet the government plowed ahead and passed that legislation. This particular amendment is very small. It's very simple in scope, Mr. Speaker. It's very politically motivated, Mr. Speaker. We know historically we saw what happened from the Minister of Highways and his tweet about some federal workers going onto property. And subsequent to that, we saw this amendment, Mr. Speaker. I'm looking forward to asking some questions about committee on this committee. I think it's largely a redundant amendment to this legislation, as everybody must abide by all laws, including provincial laws, Mr. Speaker. As such, of course, everybody must abide by all laws and including provincial laws, Mr. Speaker. There's no objection to that. Where there have been concerns raised, it's the political nature that spurred this amendment on. And, Mr. Speaker, the legitimate concerns we were hearing, at least from not just federal workers, but provincial workers as well, those who work at Sask Energy, Sask Power, and the like, good Crown workers at all levels of government who have to do this sort of work. And the rhetoric that was inflamed by the members opposite, in particular the Minister for Highways, the result was many of these workers fearing for their safety, Mr. Speaker. We take that concern as legitimate, absolutely, Mr. Speaker, and urge that the government think about their actions and the implications on folks like those who have to go and do legitimate work on behalf of our crowns, Mr. Speaker, in the province, both federal and provincial. Mr. Speaker, like I said, I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to ask some questions about this bill at committee. In order to facilitate that, I'm prepared to allow this bill to move on to its next stage.
The question before the Assembly is a motion by the member that Bill number 109 be now read a second time. It is the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Second reading of this bill.
To which committee shall this bill be committed? I recognize the Government Deputy House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
This bill stands committed to the Standing Committee on Intergovernmental Affairs and Justice.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 2, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 116, the Plant Health Act. Ms. Bowes.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to enter into debate today on Bill number 116, the Plant Health Act. A number of changes being proposed in this bill, Mr. Speaker, and primarily they revolve around PCOs, or pest control officers, and what they have the ability to do. So it's outlining the fact that they can declare any animal, insect, or disease dangerous to plants or crops as a pest. The minister can appoint pest control officers to take care of it and order the destruction of at-risk plants and declare a state of emergency. In this, there are some requirements that the ministry is required to pay for destroyed crops and need to still meet municipal bylaws while ordering compliance. There's some rules around how this all plays out, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's important to look at pest control and prevention as an agricultural province. Agricultural exports are incredibly important to us. We know that. Anything that would threaten our farmers' crops is something we have to pay close attention to, and we know that that would have be a hard hit to the farming industry. And the last thing that we need is for pests to be creating food scarcity at a time where we already have issues with inflation, supply chain issues. You know, there are a lot of concerns as it comes to making sure people can get food on the table and the high rates that people are paying at the grocery store. So, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to have a look through this piece of legislation. I will leave more questions to our critic and as it moves forward, but with that I would move to adjourn debate on this bill for today.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure of Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 3, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 117, the Saskatchewan Firearms Act. Mr. Vermette.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon Centre.
Miigwech, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to enter my remarks regarding this bill that's being proposed here, the Saskatchewan Firearms Act. So when I think of this, this particular act hits home for me. You know, we know there's many folks out there that are responsible gun owners, and we need to ensure that our the public is safe, and we also need to ensure that we consult with impacted communities. You know, when I think of this, I knew that I would have to speak to this, and this particular bill speaks so close to me because almost 37 years ago, my first husband was shot in the head by an individual that did not have a license to carry firearms. So when I think about this, I think, yes, we need to have responsible legislation in place. I also feel, as a First Nations person who relies on wildlife for sustenance, for ceremony, for consumption, it's important that we don't get penalized for a few irresponsible people, that it's important that we're not penalized. And I have my community, lots of people that I know are responsible gun owners, and they hunt for sustenance. And I share the concerns that FSIN has that they weren't consulted in the creation of this bill. And it's sad, and it is sad, and it is history. History is a present reality today where this government does not consult with impacted communities, especially when we look at legislation that could potentially negatively impact us. We're not consulted. So I'm going to read this letter, or this Leader Post article from March 9th. And this is from the FSIN. FSIN says the proposed Saskatchewan Firearms Act was introduced in the legislature without consulting First Nations and lacks provisions or exemptions for First Nations treaty rights and sustenance hunting and gathering. Quote, the treaty right to hunt, fish and gather is fundamental to the assurances that were made to First Nations under treaty, and we will protect our treaties to the fullest extent, end quote. So, quote, when our treaty people are on the land gathering sustenance, provincial and federal gun legislation or any other regulations do not apply, end quote. The Saskatchewan Firearms Act, Bill 117, was introduced by the provincial government in December. The government says it's intended to protect the rights of lawful firearm owners in response to a federal proposal to ban semi-automatic weapons. I won't read any more into this, but the gist is that we have a history in this province of not consulting impacted people.
Hear, hear.
For 15 years, this current government has not and continues to not consult impacted communities, and that is wrong. As legislators, we are here to protect all people, to serve all people, not just a select few. And when we don't consult, how on earth are we ever going to have relationships when we do not have the respect to consult in a way that's meaningful to people that are going to be impacted? We have a long list of bills that have been introduced in this province where First Nation and Métis people have not and continue not to be consulted. And that is appalling, especially when this government continues to give lip service to reconciliation, and they do the opposite. I won't say any more on this bill, but this bill is something that we need to, and this government needs to consult with First Nation and Métis folks, because we're not doing that, and we need to have that dialogue. Not just here's a letter, here you go, here's an email, or come to this website and tell us your opinion. That just doesn't cut it. That's not consultation. You need to get out of these four walls of the buildings and go out to those communities and talk to them and ask them, how is this legislation that we're proposing going to impact you? Let's have discussion on it. And yet, repeatedly, this government fails to do that. And yeah, and it shows. It shows in the arrogance, and they're tired. They're tired government. We need to vote them out. And yeah, they need to be voted out, and the people need to take a stand, take their place, and say, no, enough's enough. We are tired of this government not consulting us on issues that impact us. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move to adjourn debate on the Bill number 117, the Saskatchewan Firearms Act.
Good. Member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 4, resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 118, the Warrant Compliance Act. Mr. Vermette.
Recognize the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to start by thanking my colleague for Saskatoon Centre for sharing a really personal story, and also speaking truth to power in her comments there, yeah, sending care your way. I will enter into debate on Bill number 118, the Warrant Compliance Act. This bill, according to the minister, seeks to improve warrant enforcement for prolific violent offenders and also helps police identify and apprehend prolific violent offenders. Certainly this is, we want to make sure that people are kept safe in the province, and if there are folks who would threaten that safety, being able to empower police to find those folks and apprehend them makes very good sense. This bill authorizes a number of things, including allowing the investigation unit of a creation of ministry to demand location information of violent offenders without warrant from any government institution. I think being able to not work in a siloed approach and have cooperation from other government institutions makes sense. You know, especially when we look at in the wake of the James Smith tragedy, being able to apprehend prolific violent offenders. It seems like there's a moment of cause for reflection in what we can do to prevent and also to make sure that there's safety in community in the wake of these incidents. There are concerns here about the lack of the definition of who is a prolific violent offender. The minister says it will be decided upon a case-by-case basis, which doesn't really seem like a workable course of action. And the lack of definition about significant hardship. We don't want any unintended consequences for families as we see this roll out, and especially kids. So I think there are some important questions here about how this is going to be operationalized, but I will leave some of those questions for the rest of my colleagues and for the critic as well. And with that, I would move to adjourn debate on Bill number 118 for today.
Members move to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 5. Resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 122, the Saskatchewan Revenue Agency Act. Mr. Teed.
Recognize the member from Cumberland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's joined on Bill 122, Saskatchewan Revenue Act. You know, initially, I'm not sure, and I don't even think the government knows why they're doing this, why such a bill would have to have its own revenue, Saskatchewan Revenue Agency, when we have the federal government that's doing it for free, not costing us anything. But so why would all of a sudden we have, and I'm sure small business people out there, but I'm sure you consulted with all the small business people to ask them, are you happy that you get to have to file 2 tax returns, one with the federal government, one with the provincial government, and go through all these hurdles? You don't think that small business people are burdened enough in this province and burdened enough by all different processes they have to go through? They do it, and I give them credit. They do what they have to do to make sure they can run their small, and some of them are small family business, some of them are bigger ones, they're bigger corporations, we understand that. But I think about the small family. They're struggling to make ends meet. So what does the government want to do? Instead, they talk. But I guess that's right. You always let us know on this side, because we're such amount of little members, they have so little members on that side of opposition, and you're such a big government. You guys remind us how many seats you have, and you can take rural area. You own the business sector. You try to make that sound really funny. But Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, it's the small business people, it's our Saskatchewan people that own this province and just want their government to take good care of what they have. And they don't mind paying taxes. They don't mind doing their part. But here you have a government, for whatever reason, and I know at the end of the day, my colleague will be checking with small business people, asking exactly. I know the small business people that I know I'm sure when you tell them, you know what, you want government duplicating service, a way of processing, and I don't understand it. I don't even know that they understand it, but I wonder what business person they met with that said to them, you know, why don't you guys have your own revenue agency for the province? Like, that makes a lot of sense. Like, duplicate all the costs. What are the true costs going to be to that? Like, what are the costs going to be? Like, there has to be, you can't tell me that, well, no, it's not going to cost anything. Like, and I can't wait till we get into committee to actually ask some tough questions about this. Like, what are the costs? Who's going to be doing what? What are they going to be able to do? What powers will the minister have? Again, here's a government that likes giving themselves power. They like taking over. They want to create a new Crown Corporation. We've watched them time and time again. They've cut Crown Corporations. They're hard on them. They've shut them down. They sell them off. But all of a sudden here, they want to make another Crown Corporation. It's just bizarre, and one that's going to cost us money. So I don't understand that. I can't understand that. But you know what? I'm going to reach out to some of the small business people that I know and ask them, what do you know about this? Did the government get a hold of you and ask you your opinion on this? And I'm going to find out, and I know the critic will do that. But again, time and time again, it's a pattern of a government that's been here way too long. 15 years. I was saying 16 years, Mr. Speaker, and I was corrected. It's 15 and a little bit. So I just want to say, but that's a very long time to be in government. And we can see now how they take the rural area for, oh, we can raise tax. I've heard ministers on that side say, we could raise taxes, they're still going to vote for us. They're never going to vote. And that's fine, I get it. You know, pat yourselves on the back that you guys do everything good. And when it's negative, it's somebody else's fault. Oh, yeah, you like blaming. When it's negative, you like blaming. Oh, what is that? Oh, federal, the Liberal, NDP, something you guys all like using that when it's convenient for you to use. But I watch how you guys just constantly have your hand out for that federal dollars. You know, they always got, sorry, Mr. Speaker, I'll go back to the chair. I watch how, Mr. Speaker, they have their hand out to the government, just begging for that federal dollars. Please help us. Well, we're seeing that the federal government maybe is taking paying more attention, saying, you know, you got to make sure you spend the money where we say we agreed that you will spend in these areas. Well, they're looking at clawing back some money in some areas. But I just want to go back to, again, Mr. Speaker, how small businesses are struggling. And they've done their part, and I thank them for that. They hire employees, and they do their good part, and they try their best to make ends meet. They do. They work hard. Some of those, you know, mom and pop operations, they do hours and hours and hours of time that they put in just to keep their business running so they can pay the bills, keep the light on. And we have a government who keeps charging them power bills time after time on the small business. Haven't you burdened the small business people enough? Haven't you burdened Saskatchewan people enough with your cost? You have access to so much wealth. Our province is wealthy, and Mr. Speaker, again, they go back to just causing more and more taxes on people. Well, whichever way they want to charge, however they want to collect that money, it doesn't matter. And Mr. Speaker, the unfortunate thing is the small business people and our citizens are paying the cost for this government through coming up with these. I don't know how they make. Do they go in a little room, Mr. Speaker, as ministers and say, let's have a little planning meeting? And how do they do that? You know, did they make a little plan saying, we're going to do this, and here's what the plan is? It almost sounds like they have this little plan, you know, they have this little plan, let's have an idea. So who do they consult with themselves? So why don't they talk to some of the backbenchers that are within their government that maybe are the ones that are in tune with some of the community and some of the business and give them some ideas? But Mr. Speaker, the funny thing at the end of the day with all this is they just want to be in charge of everything. They want to take ownership and pat themselves on the back for anything that they can possibly take. They don't want to give anyone else credit. But as soon as somebody in this province criticize them, small business, Mr. Speaker, residents who want better care, ask the government to please take care of the dollars, the dollars. And you know what? The dollars that they pay in as taxes, the dollars that the PST, and we know what goes on with that. But having said that, is this agency they're going to have, will they have the power, this new tax agency, Saskatchewan Revenue Agency, will they have the powers, Mr. Speaker, to go in and what? Make sure everyone paid their 31 new fees and taxes they put on them last budget? 31 new fees and taxes they put on people. So is that agency going to go and make sure they're all paying that? Is that what that's for? That revenue, you know, the Revenue Act, is that what they're going to do? Special investigators Did you pay for that? Did you pay for that gym membership, the PST or the fee? Oh, no, that's right. We canceled that one. We heard there was such a burden, we canceled that one. So again, Mr. Speaker, I know individuals will wonder about this, and all I can say on this is my colleague, the critic, will be asking some tough questions, and I think business people out there need to get a hold of this government and ask them exactly, why are you doing this? What's the purpose of it? So on that, I'm not going to take much more time. I know we've got to get ready for some work that's going to be done in here. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm prepared to adjourn debate on 122, the Saskatchewan Revenue Act.
Member has moved to adjourn debate as a pleasure of Assembly to adopt the motion.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 6. Resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 124, the Alcohol and Gaming Regulation Amendment Act 2022. Ms. Conway.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good to weigh in here. I'm going to be brief with my remarks on behalf of the opposition with respect to Bill 124, the Alcohol and Gaming Regulation Amendment Act 2022. A number of my colleagues have had a chance to weigh in here already, so I will, kind of reinforce some of the comments that have been put on the record already. It has been mentioned by most, if not all, of our members who have spoken to this to say that we definitely have been hearing mixed responses from stakeholders in our own consultation around this bill. As one of my colleagues has already noted, this was actually an idea that originated from the opposition initially and then was sort of latched onto by the Sask Party government. Fair enough. I guess imitation's the best, form of flattery. We didn't go ahead with this in a rushed fashion, I'll say, Mr. Speaker, because we recognize the value of consultation, unlike this government, who wanted, a nice little headline, nice little kind of vote by, without really doing the work that needs to go into all forms of legislation. So I can absolutely guarantee you they haven't done their work consulting on this front. We know that because we've been hearing ourselves from the stakeholders that they seem to have an allergy to actually talking to and consulting. So we've done our work. Our critic, certainly for municipal affairs, has been out reaching out to municipal leaders across the province, as I'm sure the government has noticed these last few months, doing that good work that ideally the government would really be doing themselves as those who are governing this province is listening to people, but don't see a whole lot of that happening. I know the critic for this bill, my colleague, the member from Meewasin, is going to be continuing his own consultations around this bill since he's taken over that file since his very successful by-election. So we will continue to do that work, Mr. Speaker, but I do not want to gloss over that we've heard some good feedback from stakeholders around the introduction of this bill, but we've also heard a lot of concern from other municipal leaders, and so I think I would ask the government to essentially do their jobs, get out there, talk to real live people, do your consultation. As my colleague, the member for Cumberland, just said in his remarks in the previous bill, this is just a continued pattern from this government who only seem to really consult themselves and not actually talk to the people, the real live people in this province who they were elected to represent and whose interests they were elected to serve. So in saying that, Mr. Speaker, the main thrust of the amendments to this bill are to, as everyone is aware, I'm sure, allow municipalities as well as regional park authorities and the PCC to designate outdoor public places as drinking permissible areas. There are some other changes being made to the amendments here. Some are housekeeping changes, which seem to make good sense. No objection there. And things like recorking, recorking laws being modernized, where open bottles need to be resealed before leaving the premises, but not with a cork. I mean, this is like pretty basic stuff, but sure, good to see it. But I think overall, I would just in all seriousness, encourage the government and the responsible minister to really get out there and listen to the folks who do have concerns that they've expressed, and make sure that those concerns are addressed in this bill, in these amendments. And I think overall, I did want to just sort of reiterate one point that one of my colleagues has made on this front, and which I do personally agree with as a whole. My colleague, the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre, had said that the relaxation of the public ban on alcohol is something that, you know, the evidence speaks to as having positive social effects, in that it alleviates that disproportionate impact that, you know, bans on the public consumption of alcohol do have on low-income people and on racialized people. Certainly our province is no different when looking at those impacts, and I think we've probably all seen it. I know I've seen over the years in my frequenting of local establishments in Saskatoon from time to time, I have seen people who are being unfairly targeted for public intoxication, and more often than is warranted and more often than is fair, those people are racialized from what I see. So I think that can be a positive outcome of this type of legislation, is making sure that that targeting is not happening. And I think patrolling and scrutinizing, you know, people who do not have, as my colleague also mentioned, sort of the luxury of backyards, nice lush green backyards to enjoy a beverage in the summer, is something that hopefully this legislation can address in some form. I know another of my colleagues has pointed to concerns around how this may impact rates of sexual assault across our province, which we know are exceptionally high, the second highest in all of Canada. So all that, again, to say, take the time, Minister, please, take the time to get this right. We aren't going to stand here and pretend that we haven't considered this ourselves, but it really is important, again, as I had said in question period to the Education Minister, to really get those details right. So that's my nice encouragement to the government, trying to be in a collaborative mood today on that front. And I think I've spoken longer than I said I would, so I'll sit down now. I'll move that we adjourn debate on Bill 124, the Alcohol and Gaming Regulation Amendment Act 2022. Thanks.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure of Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders adjourn debates. Item number 7. Resume debate on the second reading motion for Bill number 126, the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022. Ms. Bowes.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Mewasin.
Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to enter into adjourn debate on Bill 126, the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act 2022. I just want to first thank our critic for the important work that she's been doing on this file, and thank our Indigenous colleagues in my caucus for the words they put on the record. I promise to be brief here today, Mr. Speaker, as I know we've got important committee work to get to, but I just want to put some comments today on the record. You know, broadly speaking, this is a bill that looks to address First Nations concerns around enforcing laws and bylaws on their First Nations. What the bill looks to extend the use of summary offense options for First Nations. For example, First Nations can issue summary offense tickets now. It goes on to offer time limits on applying to strike those convictions. You know, we're seeing a 15 to 60-day window open up, options for prosecutors to apply for those, the striking of those convictions, not just the offenders, and the judge is able to extend that time limit. Mr. Speaker, the bill furthers into allowing making sure that judges cannot just continue to grant extensions on fines that are in default or forgive late payments. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill, like I've mentioned, will will continue to consult with stakeholders. This bill it addresses the issue that First Nations have been asking for, in that enforcement and prosecution are long-standing issues on reserves, and we need to make sure that this amendment will help them with that request. We know that there have been pilot projects put forward, and we are watching those results closely. We really do agree that there is good in an extension period for conviction reconsideration, you know, adding the powers, giving those powers to prosecutors and judges to make that happen, not just the offenders. Mr. Speaker, as we've said before, we always support any legislation that continues to enshrine First Nations control over their own governance. This is so important. We will always support that legislation that furthers self-governance. The opposition supports the plan to continue to enshrine First Nations rights. We saw this with the Cannabis Act. But Mr. Speaker, just at the end of the day, I think that the point I wanted to make is that First Nations know their communities. They know what will work and what won't. They know what challenges they're seeing, I think better than most of us in this chamber. So we hope that the minister is consulting appropriately. As always, we will continue to consult our own stakeholders, and I know our critic will have much more to say and have many more questions in committee. So at this time, I'm prepared to adjourn debate on Bill 126, the Summary Offences Procedure Amendment Act.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. As a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. I recognize the Government Deputy House Leader.
Speaker, I move that this House now adjourn.
The Deputy House Leader has moved to adjourn the House. As pledge of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned till 10 a.m. tomorrow.